Step out. Engine off. Now. Hands up.
Sir? Please! He's dying! I need to get him to
who's
the
inside.
hospital!
I don't care who's inside. Step out. Move it.
Look at the monitor! He's flatlining! You can see it! I can't just
I
stop!
said step out, or I'll drag you myself.
He's a judge. He just died while you're doing this.
The siren was still screaming when the cuff snapped shut. Red lights pulsed across wet asphalt as an ambulance engine running. Doors sealed sat frozen on the shoulder of a Georgia highway. Inside, a judge's pulse faltered by the second. Outside, an officer made a choice that would ripple through courtrooms, careers, and a $45 million reckoning. This is not a story about a single arrest. It's about how procedure, bias, and pride collide, sometimes fatally under flashing lights. If you care about how power is exercised in quiet moments, how one decision can outpace the law itself. Stay with this story. Listen closely to what happens between sirens and silence, where accountability is tested and the truth leaves a paper trail. The fog sat low over the asphalt, a thin white skin that softened the edges of everything it touched. Pine trees along the shoulder appeared and disappeared like silhouettes in a half-remembered dream. At 5:42 a.m., the highway outside Macon was almost empty, just the steady hum of tires, the glow of dashboard lights, and the ambulance cutting through it all with a siren that refused to be ignored. The driver kept both hands firm on the wheel. His name badge caught the intermittent red-blue wash from the light bar, letters flickering like a heartbeat. 10 years on the job had trained his body into calm precision. He knew the statute by memory. Georgia Code Section 40 to 6-6 emergency vehicles permitted to exceed speed limits when responding to a medical emergency. Lights and siren engaged. Due regard for safety. Everything about this run followed the book. Dispatch logged, route confirmed, hospital notified. The patient was unstable in the back. The judge drifted in and out of awareness, breath shallow, skin damp. When his eyes opened, they searched the ceiling as if looking for a familiar phrase, a sentence he once knew how to finish. The cardiac monitor spoke in a language of beeps and intervals, each one a reminder that time was not an abstract concept. Tonight it was measurable, audible, slipping. The first flash of red and blue appeared in the side mirror like a mistake. The driver noticed it immediately. His jaw tightened, not in fear but in calculation. He eased slightly to the right, keeping speed steady, expecting the cruiser to pass. It didn't. The lights stayed glued to the rear doors. The siren's pitch didn't change, but its meaning did. Confusion entered the cab like cold air. He keyed the radio. Dispatch. Confirm State Patrol initiating stop on active emergency transport. Static. Then overlap. Another unit calling in. A supervisor requesting a location. Too many voices at once. He slowed, every mile per hour feeling like a concession he didn't have the authority to make. Finally, he guided the ambulance onto the shoulder, hazards blinking beneath the strobe. The trooper approached with a hand resting near his holster, boots crunching on gravel. His body-worn camera blinked red, recording, buffering, impartial. Training manuals would later say this moment required discretion. The trooper's posture said control. Driver, shut it down, he said, voice clipped, practiced. There's a patient in cardiac distress, the EMT replied, already reaching for his credentials. His tone stayed even, professional. We're en route to Atrium Medical. Lights and siren authorized. The trooper didn't look past him. He glanced at the badge, then at the driver's face, then back at the ambulance, as if it were an object, not a responsibility. You were doing 85. Under emergency exemption, the EMT said. Statute 46. Step out of the vehicle. Inside the ambulance, the judge stirred. His fingers twitched, searching for something solid. The monitor stuttered, corrected, then stuttered again. A medic leaned close, speaking softly, trying to anchor him. Stay with me. We're almost there. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing sound. The siren had been cut. The silence that replaced it felt wrong, too heavy, too final. The EMT stepped down, palms open, hands visible without being asked. He explained again, slower this time, choosing words like tools, dispatch timestamps, medical priority, chain of command. Each sentence was a bridge offered. The trooper's radio crackled. A supervisor was minutes out. Procedure suggested clearing the scene, escorting the ambulance if necessary. Procedure also allowed discretion. The camera caught the pause, 3 seconds, where the decision balanced, fragile. Turn around, the trooper said. What? The EMT's voice barely rose, but something underneath it did. Sir, the patient, turn around. Hands behind your back. Metal clicked. Too loud. Too permanent. As the cuffs closed, the EMT twisted his head toward the ambulance doors, eyes searching the reflective red paint as if he could see through it. You're killing him, he said, not as an accusation, but as a fact he couldn't unlearn. The trooper guided him toward the cruiser, body between the man and the vehicle he'd sworn to keep moving. In the back, the judge's breathing faltered. A medic banged once on the partition, then again harder. The doors stayed shut. The camera kept recording. The fog kept drifting, and the ambulance engine idling, purpose suspended, waited on the shoulder of a Georgia highway while time made its choice. The ambulance idled like a held breath. Diesel vibration hummed through the frame, steady and stubborn, as if the machine itself refused to accept that it had been reduced to waiting. Fog gathered along the shoulder and lapped against the tires, softening the world into a narrow corridor of authority and delay. Inside the cab, the radio came alive again. Dispatch voices overlapped, polite at first and sharpened by clocks they couldn't see. Unit, confirm patient status, a beat. Advise current ETA, another beat. The hospital cut in, clinical and calm. Cardiac receiving is standing by. We need updated vitals. Each transmission stacked urgency with a resolution. The EMT stood beside the cruiser, wrists cuffed in front now, an adjustment that felt like mercy without meaning. He kept his eyes level, his voice low. 10 years of field work had taught him that escalation often lived in tone, not words. Sir, he said, this transport is logged as critical. Under state protocol, delay beyond 5 minutes materially increases risk. We're past that window. The trooper didn't reply immediately. He angled his body toward the road, posture squared, one hand resting on his belt. His Bodycam blinked, red recording, impartial, unblinking. You failed to yield, he said finally. That's the issue. I slowed. I notified dispatch. It's time-stamped. The trooper exhaled through his nose. You don't get to decide compliance. There it was, not shouted, not cruel, just stated. A line drawn with a sentence. In the back, the judge's breathing thinned. The medic watched his chest, counting without moving her lips. The cardiac monitor traced a rhythm that had begun to hesitate, like a runner unsure of the next step. She adjusted oxygen flow, checked leads, rechecked blood pressure. The numbers slid anyway. She reached for the radio handset, stopped, then pressed it. We're seeing hypotension, she said, choosing language that couldn't be misunderstood. Patient is deteriorating. Outside, the words floated into fog and didn't come back. A supervisor had been requested. The ETA changed twice, traffic, distance, protocol. Each update sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a wall. The EMT tried again, this time citing hierarchy instead of statute. Sir, if there's a concern, escort us. I'll answer for it later. That's standard. The trooper turned, meeting his eyes. The camera caught the moment clearly. Two men standing inches apart, one bound by cuffs, the other by certainty. Standard doesn't override safety, he said. And right now, you're not in charge. The EMT swallowed. He nodded once, not in agreement, but acknowledgement the way you do when you understand. The argument has moved somewhere facts can't follow. Inside the ambulance, the medic leaned close to the judge's face. Sir, squeeze my hand. His fingers twitched, then fell still. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused, as if searching for a bench, a lectern, a place where words had once mattered. He tried to speak. No sound came. The monitor beeped faster, then irregular. She radioed again, louder now. We have a cardiac event. Request immediate clearance. The trooper's radio crackled, the supervisor's voice closer, firmer. What's the status? There was a pause before the answer. The kind of pause that would later be measured in depositions. The trooper looked toward the ambulance, then back at the EMT, then down at the cuffs. Authority recalibrated not to facts, but to proximity. Patients crashing, he said into the radio. Stand by. Stand by. The words landed inside the ambulance like a weight. The medic tore open the defibrillator pads, hands moving from muscle memory, not hope. She called out times anyway. She always did. Compress. Count. Breathe. The judge's body responded mechanically without commitment. The sound of the monitor flattened, then spiked, then flattened again. Outside, the EMT felt the cuffs loosen. Metal clicked open. The trooper stepped back, creating space that felt sudden and inadequate. Get back in, he said. The EMT didn't run because he was angry. He ran because seconds had become something physical, something he could feel pressing between his ribs. He vaulted into the driver's seat as the sirens snapped back to life mid-motion, louder than before, harsher. Red and blue tore through the fog again, carving a corridor that felt ceremonial in its lateness. They pulled onto the highway with an escort now, the cruiser leading, lights blazing. Dispatch logged the resumed movement. A clean digital line formed behind them. Stop time, restart time, distance traveled. Neat, Impersonal. Inside, compressions continued. The medic counted aloud, voice steady, eyes fixed. The judge's face had gone gray, features settling into something quieter than sleep. The siren wailed, but it no longer promised arrival. It announced urgency without hope. They reached the hospital in record time. Air bay doors flew open. Fluorescent light washed everything flat. Hands replaced hands. A physician glanced at the monitor, then at the medic's face. How long was the delay? She answered honestly. Numbers mattered now. The siren died as it always did, abruptly, without ceremony. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with things that couldn't be undone. Outside, the trooper parked and cut his lights. He stood for a moment, listening to the sudden normalcy of the morning. Passing cars, distant birds, the world continuing without permission. His camera was still recording. Inside, the EMT stood against a wall, sweat cooling on his skin, staring at a closed curtain. He knew the sound that would come next. He'd heard it before. The absence of a monitor. The absence of motion. When the doctor stepped out and shook his head, it didn't feel like surprise. It felt like confirmation. Later, reports would call it a delay. Logs would list minutes. Policy would argue thresholds. But in the quiet between sirens, hierarchy had spoken louder than facts and time had listened. The siren had resumed. But it would never sound the same again. The ER bay swallowed sound. Fluorescent lights flattened everything beneath them, faces, uniforms, urgency until the world felt drained of depth. The ambulance doors swung open, and the judge was rolled out, chest rising only because hands forced it to. The medic kept counting under her breath, even as hospital staff took over, even as she knew the cadence no longer matched anything inside him. Clear. The defibrillator discharged. The body jumped, then settled. The monitor answered with a thin, unforgiving line. A physician stepped forward, eyes trained not on the screen, but on the patient's face. He checked pupils, listened, looked at the clock mounted high on the wall, the one everyone trusted because it never blinked. Time of death, he said. Voice steady, almost gentle. 0632. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed and stayed. Hands slowed, then stopped. Gloves came off. The medic backed away, suddenly aware of the ache in her shoulders, the dryness in her mouth. She stared at the sheet pulled over the judge's face, at the shape it made when it settled. She thought of the minutes on the shoulder, the radio calls unanswered, the way the siren had sounded wrong when it came back. Outside the bay, the EMT leaned against the wall, palms pressed flat, breathing shallow, no cuffs now, no escort, just the hum of hospital air, and the knowledge that something irreversible had finished happening. When the physician met his eyes and shook his head, the EMT nodded once. He didn't speak. His hands were still shaking, as if the road hadn't ended yet. Paperwork began immediately. It always did. A nurse logged arrival time. Another entered vitals last recorded, then blank. Transport delay noted, carefully phrased. The electronic health record accepted the data without judgment. Somewhere in the system, the gap between stop and restart became a number. Down the corridor, a hospital administrator made a call. The judge's name carried weight even in a whisper. Within minutes, the chief medical officer was present, then hospital counsel. Not to interfere, just to observe, to understand how this would read later. The trooper arrived last, his boots quieter on linoleum than they'd been on gravel. His Bodycam was still active. Policy required it remain on through patient transfer. The red light blinked, capturing the aftermath no one trained for. He watched the sheet, the stillness beneath it, and then he looked away. He found a computer terminal and began his report. Time of stop. Reason for stop. Speed estimated. Driver non-compliance. Scene safety concerns. Supervisor requested. Ambulance cleared. Each sentence stood on its own. Defensible. Procedural. It read clean. It read complete. It did not mention the sound of the monitor. It did not mention the medic's voice over the radio. Reports rarely did. Internal Affairs opened a parallel file before sunrise. That decision didn't come from outrage. It came from alignment. A death. A delay. A recording. Policy required review when those elements intersected. An email went out marked administrative non-disciplinary pending review. The language was neutral. The implications were not. By mid-morning, the EMT was formally released. No charges. No citation. A brief apology from a supervisor who hadn't been there. We'll be in touch, he was told, which meant interviews, statements, waiting. He stepped outside into daylight that felt too bright. Phone buzzing with messages he didn't yet have the strength to read. At the courthouse, flags lowered to half-staff. The judge's chambers were sealed quietly without announcement. Clerks, boxed papers. A framed photograph was turned face down on a desk. Someone removed a coffee mug and hesitated, then put it back. The building carried on with the peculiar dignity of institutions that outlive the people who serve them. The first news alert landed just after noon. Retired appellate judge dies during medical transport. No mention of the stop. No mention of the delay. Just age, service record. A quote from a colleague about integrity. The story read like closure. It didn't last. A local reporter filed a records request routine, almost reflexive. Bodycam footage, dispatch logs, incident reports. Georgia's open records law moved slowly, then all at once. A second outlet noticed the timestamps. A third noticed the discrepancy between transport protocol and reported actions. By evening, the headline changed shape. Questions raised after judge's death during ambulance stop. The trooper's report was still clean, but now it was being read next to other documents. Dispatch audio where urgency rose. Hospital logs where arrival time stretched. Bodycam footage where the siren cut and silence settled in. Truth, it turned out, was a document problem. Every timestamp mattered. Every omission echoed louder once placed beside something else. The camera didn't editorialize. It just showed pauses, interruptions. A supervisor's voice arriving late. A decision framed as control. Internal affairs scheduled interviews. Training manuals were pulled. Emergency vehicle statutes highlighted. The question wasn't framed as intent. It never was. It was framed as judgment. The trooper was placed on administrative leave. Paid. Procedural. The email announcing it was careful to note there was no presumption of wrongdoing. The public read it differently. Outside the hospital, candles appeared near the entrance, quiet, unsanctioned. Someone taped a handwritten note to the wall. He deserved a chance. The EMT sat at his kitchen table long after dark, staring at his phone. Messages from coworkers, from family, from strangers. Support tangled with accusation, grief with anger. He replayed the stop in his head, not as memory, but as evidence. What he'd said. How he'd said it. What he might have changed if time moved differently. At headquarters, the trooper sat alone in an office with the lights dimmed, watching his own footage. He paused it often, rewound, played it again. In the reflection of the screen, his face looked unfamiliar, older, harder. He focused on procedure, on training, on the words he'd chosen because they'd always worked before. Outside, the story accelerated. By the end of the week, the judge's death was no longer a line in an obituary. It was a case, a file. A question moving toward courtrooms and committees, toward conclusions that would be argued long after the fog had lifted from that stretch of highway. In the space between what happened and what would be decided, the documents kept growing, clean lines, careful language, a record of minutes that could never be returned. And somewhere inside that record, the quiet between sirens, waited to be named. Discovery didn't begin with confrontation. It began with boxes, cardboard, neatly labeled, wheeled into conference rooms with the quiet efficiency of people who knew the ritual well. Training manuals, policy bulletins, dispatch protocols, bodycam storage logs. Each item was an attempt to translate a human moment into something measurable, something defensible. On paper, everything made sense until it didn't. The trooper sat for his deposition beneath fluorescent lights that made time feel suspended. His attorney's voice stayed calm, almost friendly, guiding him through years of service, commendations, firearms qualifications. Then the questions narrowed. Emergency vehicle exemptions. Georgia Code Section 40-6-6. The phrase due regard appeared again and again, stretched thin by interpretation. Are you trained that ambulances responding with lights and sirens are permitted to exceed posted speed limits? Yes. And are you trained that the priority is patient welfare absent an immediate public safety threat? Yes. The pauses between answers grew longer. Seconds, measured and noted. When Bodycam audio played, the room leaned in, not for what was said, but for how. Interruptions, a raised breath, the way the EMT's sentences were cut short just before completion. Experts would later testify that tone was a form of force, that command presence could redirect outcomes without ever issuing an explicit order. On the recording, the siren's absence felt louder than any word. The EMT's deposition came a week later. He wore a plain suit, hands folded, voice steady despite the attention. His attorney asked him to walk through the stop minute by minute. Dispatch logs appeared on a screen behind him, timestamps, radio IDs, escalation markers. He explained protocols the way he always had, not defensively, but as fact. Emergency transport, chain of command, Escort as an alternative. He didn't speculate about intent. He didn't need to. Public scrutiny followed him everywhere. His name trended. His photo circulated. Commentators split along familiar lines: procedure versus humanity, order versus consequence. He kept working limited shifts, shadowed by questions he wasn't allowed to answer. His life widened into something he hadn't asked for, a public record he couldn't close. Expert witnesses entered the frame. A former state patrol trainer testified that discretion was not absolute, that stopping an active ambulance required articulable danger, not generalized authority. A medical ethicist spoke about the duty to render aid, about how delay itself could constitute harm. A use of force analyst pointed to the cuffs, to how restraint altered the equation from traffic enforcement to custody. The defense countered with their own experts: scene safety, officer vulnerability, the unknowns of pre-dawn stops, reasonableness. The word reasonable appeared so often it began to lose shape. The civil complaint named more than the trooper. It named the department, training standards, supervisory response times, bodycam policy that allowed discretion to supersede urgency. It framed the death not as a single error, but as the predictable outcome of layered decisions. The language was careful, almost gentle. It didn't accuse. It demonstrated. Settlement talks began quietly, then stalled. Numbers were floated and pulled back. Statements drafted and redrafted. The family wanted accountability, not just compensation. The state wanted closure without precedent. Evidence, however, refused to bend. Dispatch audio, bodycam footage, hospital logs. Together, they formed a line that couldn't be smoothed by explanation. Internal reviews expanded. Memos circulated. Training refreshers were scheduled, then postponed, then scheduled again. Departments began asking uncomfortable questions of themselves. Not in public yet, but in rooms where policy lived. The trooper's career narrowed to seconds. Every evaluation returned to the same window of time: the pause before cuffs, the moment after the medic's call, the delay waiting for a supervisor. Years of service compressed into choices that fit on a timeline no longer than a commercial break. He was offered early retirement. Declined. Offered again. At night he replayed the audio without video, focusing on voices, on his own. On the way, control had felt like safety until it didn't. The EMT stopped watching coverage. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of it in grocery store glances, in the way coworkers spoke carefully around him. He focused on work, on patience, on moving when sirens asked him to. Months passed. The case matured. Then quietly, the tone changed. Negotiations resumed with seriousness. Policy reforms were attached to numbers. Emergency stop protocols rewritten. Mandatory supervisory overrides drafted. Bias and discretion training expanded beyond slides into scenarios that felt uncomfortably familiar. Bodycam compliance tightened, not admissions improvements. The system, slow and defensive by nature, had begun to look at itself. In a final mediation session, the evidence played again, unedited this time. No arguments layered on top, just sequence, cause, effect. When it ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Outside, reporters waited. Inside, signatures followed. The settlement wasn't announced that day. Neither were the reforms. Those would come together, packaged as progress. But in that room, beneath lights that never dimmed, the case stopped being about blame. It became about consequence. And consequence, once documented, has a way of changing how power moves the next time a siren sounds. The jury room stayed empty. No opening statements. No exhibits carried past oak doors. No verdict read aloud at the end of a long afternoon. Instead, the resolution arrived the way institutional truths often do, through a press release, drafted to sound calm, careful, inevitable. The state agreed to settle. $45 million. The number moved faster than the explanation. It dominated headlines, crawled across television screens, trended for a full news cycle before anyone asked what it was really paying for. Officially, it was not an admission of wrongdoing. It never was. It was a recognition of loss, a measure of harm. A line drawn under a case the state no longer wanted to argue. Attached to the settlement were reforms. They were written in neutral language, but they read like a confession. Revised emergency stop protocols that required troopers to defer immediately to active medical transport unless an articulable, imminent threat existed. Mandatory supervisory override when stopping ambulances, no discretion without review. Expanded bias training, scenario-based, evaluated annually. Stricter bodycam compliance, including automatic alerts when emergency vehicles were detained beyond a set threshold. No apology, just policy. The memo went out quietly to every state trooper. It was labeled Operational Update. Most skimmed it. Some read it twice. A few recognized themselves between the lines. In roll call rooms and patrol cars, conversations shifted not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. The rules had narrowed. The margins where authority once lived were smaller now. The trooper learned he had lost certification on a Tuesday. The notice was brief, procedural, almost impersonal. His training record no longer met the standards required for sworn service. Years of evaluations reduced to a paragraph. There would be no public ceremony, no formal condemnation. He turned in his gear, his badge last. The weight of it surprised him, not its mass, but what it represented. Power, once granted, did not announce its departure. He left the building without saying much. Outside, the morning looked ordinary. That, more than anything, unsettled him. The department issued a statement thanking him for his service and wishing him well. It read clean. The EMT returned to work after the settlement. Uniform pressed, boots scuffed the same way they always had been. Nothing about the job had changed on the surface. Sirens still screamed. Dispatch still overlapped. Patients still waited at the edge of minutes. But he carried a different weight now, not fear, not anger, but awareness. He noticed how quickly officers waved him through at intersections. How supervisors answered the radio faster. How the new protocol checklist appeared on his dash tablet, mandatory and unavoidable. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt tired. At a training session months later, his case was referenced without names. A scenario. A learning module. Recruits watched Bodycam clips with the audio lowered, focusing on timing, on pauses. On what happened when no one moved. He didn't speak during the discussion. He didn't need to. The footage spoke for him. The judge's family released a statement after the settlement was announced. It thanked first responders who had tried to help. It acknowledged the reforms. It did not claim closure. Grief, they said, did not respond to numbers. At the courthouse, a plaque was installed quietly. No ceremony. Just the name, dates, and a line about service. People passed it every day without stopping. Years later, the policy remained. Emergency vehicles stopped less often. When they were, supervisors arrived faster. Bodycam alerts triggered. Dispatch flagged delays in real time. The system adjusted not because it had found morality, but because it had learned consequence. Justice, in the end, did not feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. The kind that settles after everything that can be said has already been documented. After the arguments have been archived. After the sirens have faded into distance. On that stretch of highway outside Macon, traffic still moved before dawn. Fog still gathered low along the trees. Ambulances still pushed speed limits with lights and sirens cutting through the dark. But now, when an officer saw those lights in a mirror, there was a different pause, not hesitation, reflection, a policy-shaped memory of what happens when control outruns care. The lesson wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was written into procedure, paid for in lives, and carried forward quietly every time an ambulance wasn't stopped, and every time a siren was allowed to keep going.